Sexton trying to get loose. He'll fire. Hey! Knocks it down. But Carl slammed it home. Garland upstairs. Oh! Sexton inside. A thunderous dunk. And Allen blocked the shot at the rim.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. Since we last recorded, the Cavs dropped a tough one against the Chicago Bulls. Unfortunately, we were correct on the last podcast that even without Zach LaVine, it was still probably going to be a competitive matchup, especially with the Cavs playing their third game in 4 nights. But it was a good performance for the Cavs young core, a young core that we will be diving into today, as well as some of the options in the 2021 draft to add to that young core. With me today to discuss it is my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
Doing very well. I felt like Cavs Twitter was a lot lower after that one than we were. There were some sad vibes on the timeline last night. But, ultimately, you have one of those trademark Cavs third quarters and then miss a bunch of open threes while the Bulls make them, and then you lose. So, it's just one of those things that happen when you're a team like the Cavs. So I don't know. I feel all right. I mean, I would have rather won, but here we stand.
Me too.
Yeah.
I'm much better with losses when they come primarily at the or due to poor play from the veterans. I'm just so invested in the young guys right now. So as long as they're playing well, I'm pretty happy. But I'm also excited to announce our special guest today from theringer.com, Kevin O'Connor, aka Kevin O'Chasedown. Kevin, how's it going?
What's going on today, guys? How you doing?
Doing really well. As I mentioned, really excited to have you on the podcast today. You are a guest that I have been lusting over, that I've wanted you in the mix here for a while. So it is great to have you here. And to start things off, Carter and I have talked about this a lot this season, where we've just really struggled with how to objectively cover this year, because there seems to be so many game-to-game weirdness with the scheduling, with the COVID protocols and all that. How difficult have you found analysis this season to be?
I mean, I've said this pretty recently on a couple different podcasts, but I think like looking ahead to the playoffs, I'm not factoring in what we've seen early in the year, like back in December, January, all too much. Like in a normal year, I think it all matters a lot. But this year with the protocols and all the challenges, for every team, it's just hard to weigh it. And I think we're sort of seeing that across the league with different types of situations. Like this whole year for everybody, it is just funky. And I think for the NBA in general, like especially a team like the Cavaliers, it's just strictly about, did guys get better? And is there ways that you can tangibly see that they got better, and not just like some hot shooting streak or whatever? And with the Cavaliers, it feels like a team that has gotten better, regardless of the circumstances around the team and the league right now.
Yeah, so I was kind of curious about that because, by some metrics, I don't think it would look like they've gotten better. I think they're, still bottom 5 in point differential. What are you seeing at a more specific level that says this is a team that has taken some steps forward, even though, obviously the win-loss is a little bit better, but otherwise, like what are you seeing from this team that is different to you from last year to this?
And I think on an individual basis, you're seeing Colin Sexton throughout the year learning how to change speeds on offense. You're seeing Darius Garland, his pick and roll playmaking, live off the dribble, being able to just whip passes with his left hand or his right hand accurately for lob opportunities, kickouts. You're just seeing him get a feel and with the physicality and the speed of the game. You're just seeing this incremental improvements from these young players. You're seeing Isaac Okoro defending, great players almost every single night and doing a pretty solid individual job at it. So, it doesn't result in wins, as it rarely ever does for young teams in the history of sports, not just basketball. So for the Cavaliers, it's really just about, on an individual basis, are these guys making improvements in the skills that they, were raw at before, or maybe just experienced that before. So overall, like I look at Cleveland and I'm encouraged in that sense.
Yeah, player development and kind of tracking these guys has been kind of the thing I've focused on the most, because game to game, especially when you're starting 4 guys that are 22 and younger, you're going to have inconsistency. And that's why I've been a big advocate of when people talk about, hey, maybe they should rest some of these guys down the stretch to help the lotto odds and whatnot. Those losses, like they're going to come organically. Like when they are clicking and they're playing at their best, they look really good. And I understand why people will get nervous about, oh, well, are they going to win too much? Are they going to outpace where they should be? But really, that hasn't been the case. And when you kind of come into each game with an understanding that, hey, there's still a big time growing curve and these guys are going to make mistakes, I think it makes it easier to stomach those. But at the same time, I do feel like there's been stretches where, because they've shown these exciting flashes, people become naturally a little more impatient when it comes to the young players.
For sure. I mean, especially like getting Jared Allen midseason. And like he has these great moments on both ends of the floor. And naturally, like you want to see the team do better and rack up wins and have an opportunity to get in the play-in tournament, which they do. The Cavaliers do have a chance to get into the play-in. But, I think with this team this whole year, it's just really about the development of those young guys. It's like we can talk a lot about like the long-term fit of Sexton and Garland. Like, will those guys fit together long-term? But I don't even think it's about that as much as just like, are these guys getting better? And they are, like, up and down the roster. Larry Nance, you could say, has gotten better for that matter, even though he's a little bit older right now at this point. And it's about finding guys for the time when it's ready to win. And you look at Cleveland's roster, they don't have that. They're not at that point yet, but they have a handful of those guys that you'd be happy to have on a winning team, whether it's Jared Allen, whether it's Larry Nance, and whether it's now, Colin Sexton, Darius Garland growing into form. So, overall, it's like Garland said, I believe it was last week, we're going to play our best basketball from here moving forward. And, obviously have had some losses after that Charlotte win, but ultimately I buy that because it does seem like these guys are starting to click.
Yeah, I agree. What is your take on the Cavs young core? Because we've been trying to evaluate where they stand relative to other young groupings in the league. And I guess right now you could kind of identify the core young four would be Garland, Sexton, Okoro, and Jared Allen. I will disagree with your colleague, Zach Cram, who before the season said that Dylan Windler was the Cavs' best young prospect.
I knew you were going to sneak a shot in about the young core rankings.
I had to.
I did not see that. Wow.
I think it was a metric-based article, in fairness, really, but Cavs Twitter was not happy.
Yeah, I think it was just, hey, this is strictly what the data says.
This is okay. Yeah,
it's still it got a couple chuckles on me, especially when he hadn't played a game yet, which maybe that's what it was, where you have a young player that hasn't yet played any of those developmental minutes. But in terms of ceilings, how would you kind of rank those four? Do you kind of feel like they're all in similar tiers? Where do they stack up for you?
I think I probably have Garland number one. Just because I've loved his playmaking since he played 3-4 games at Vanderbilt. I think coming out of high school, his playmaking ability is super, super impressive. He's one of those guys we're seeing the ability to create space from the perimeter, hit threes for you, off the dribble, off the catch. He has that offensive versatility to do a lot. He can create for himself or create for others. And I place a high value on that. And I think naturally, it's tough to say. Like, Isaac Okoro would be the clear number one if there's a clear path to being a very good offensive player. But right now, I'd probably have him 3 behind Sexton. Sexton, like, his development on both ends is very impressive. And with Okoro, though, like, he's that guy. Like, I say third for him, but fact is that we've seen flashes here and there going back to Auburn this year with Cleveland, where it's like, okay, if the offense comes along here, we already know as a rookie, there's not a lot of rookies you can look at and say they know how to make smart decisions on the floor. They make the right play. They are very good, for their age and their experience level on the defensive end of the floor. Okoro is one of those guys you can say that. It's really just a matter of what level his offense reaches. And in that area, like, there's a little bit less confidence. But I'd have him third right now because I think we've seen some of those offensive flashes. Like, are you guys on the same page there, with ranking them? Or
yeah, I think so. And it's funny because, I noticed it even in your tone, like, again, I still think Sexton's game makes you want to put other people in front of him, but he just kind of has continued to make himself a little undeniable, where it's like, well, he keeps getting better, so what am I supposed to do here? I have to kind of keep assuming that he's got a higher potential, because I think NBA Twitter at large would probably not like that ranking from the perspective of Sexton would be too high for them.
Isn't, you said something in there about like Sexton's doing stuff that makes him undeniable. And I was thinking last night, like thinking ahead to this recording today, it's like the ESPN's top 25 players under 25. They only had 4 players under 22 years old on that. Right. Only 4. It was Zion, Ja, Anthony Edwards, and Tyrese Halliburton. It's like, it was a very older under 25 lists. And it's like with Cleveland, they're starting a bunch of dudes under 22. Like, that's like very few of these Cavs players are quote unquote
Jared Allen is like the vet of that young core, and he's 22.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's like the Cavs, what are these guys going to be like when they're 23, almost 24 or 25? It could be totally different perspective of how like NBA Twitter and whatnot views these guys.
Yeah, the most exciting thing for me with Sexton is even looking at his recent play. So he's been battling through a bit of a groin injury. The 3-point shooting has come down. It's come cratering down, but he still has a true shooting percentage in that stretch over 60%. And the fact that he's still scoring efficiently while having the ball less makes me feel better about how he could long-term fit with this team, regardless of what talent they add. Because when you do have a guy that can be dominant scoring without being ball dominant, that's just such an asset to have. But I definitely agree with you with the upside of Okoro. We had Dave Dufour on the podcast before the season, and he put him number one. He's all in. He believes he can have that Jaylen Brown type ascension down the road. Obviously, a believer in his work ethic to get there. So one question I do have, just as a follow-up to your rankings, I assume you have Allen fourth just because of the value of centers in today's game, if they're not kind of those key cogs.
Bingo. That's exactly it.
Okay. Yeah. To me, like, that makes a lot of sense. I like the fact that he's showing a little bit of passing on the short roll and maybe the potential for a spot up three in the corner. But for me, like, a lot of times when it comes to centers, if you can't be that like Jokic or Bam type offensive hub, I like guys that just know their role, that stick to what they do best. And to me, like, Jared Allen has a really, really high floor. Like, I think he fits with just about any team. But I understand that from a ceiling standpoint where they can't be that kind of an offensive focal point.
For sure. And with Jared Allen, like, he also, you mentioned how Dave Dufour loves Okoro's work ethic. Jared Allen is also like another high character guy. Yeah. He's a great kid who loves the game, loves to work hard. So he's somebody who, whatever level he reaches, he will maximize what he can be. Just a matter of what that can be. And I view him probably more as that, high-end role player who impacts winning, but not necessarily like a star level player or a top 30 guy. Whereas I think you can see that path for Garland and Sexton and Okoro, but for Allen, not quite as much.
I'm really happy that the consensus is shifting with Garland, that he is the top prospect, because I know I got a lot of pushback at the start of the year. And I was like, especially with 9 months off, I was doing soul searching. I was like, is this just because I haven't seen these guys play in a long time and my hopes and wishes are clouding my objective judgment? Like, I was going to question if he didn't blossom this year, I was going to be questioning my own sanity. And speaking of that 9-month layoff, how much more fun is it to evaluate this draft class? One, because you actually got to have a tournament experience. It's also just a better draft class, but this has to be a breath of fresh air compared to what you had to go through last year.
For sure. No, it's it's way better to actually be able to watch basketball.
Yeah, I agree.
That makes everything better, including scouting the draft.
I had to imagine so. And the one interesting wrinkle for this year's draft class to me is that G League Ignite team. I think it's fair to call that a success. Do you think more players are going to go that direction, or do you think you're still going to get kind of the split that we saw this year? Because I know there was a conversation after the tournament on whether or not more players are going to want that exposure that comes with March Madness versus the value of playing against grown men in the G League.
I think you'll see a split, at least for the years to come. How long that lasts, I don't know. The NBA, there's still going to be the talk about moving the age limit to allow people to go straight from high school to the NBA. I haven't heard a peep about that. And I mean, since before the pandemic, I can't remember the last time I've heard anything tangible about that age moving. But, the years to come for the NBA, I think the G League Ignite team, it's like you said, it was a success. It really was. Obviously, under unique circumstances this year, having to do it in the bubble down in Orlando the way they did, rather than having them based out of near Los Angeles like they had planned to. And, they had a change on the fly. And yet it still feels like, from a scouting perspective, for me personally, I like seeing Jalen Green and Jonathan Kuminga in that environment. And people I talked to in the league found, value in that, because the fact is that those two guys, Green and Kuminga, and others that were on those teams, but especially them as the top 5, top 10 prospects, they're playing against a lot of guys who have been in the NBA before, or guys who are on the cusp of being in the NBA, or players who are grizzled over veterans who might have played overseas at some time. And it's just a more talented group of men, really. Whereas in college, it's college athletes, and there's a lot less talent. So I think having that experience for the players is valuable. And from a scouting standpoint, getting to see them operate in that environment was valuable for me too. It really helps, I thought.
I do wonder if, because I've heard that the original plans for the Ignite were to be a little bit more of like a road show for that squad, like doing kind of exhibitions and things like that, as opposed to what we got this year, which was like they were basically just an extra G League team. Like do you think that kind of changes the calculus a little, if like they're kind of being used as a marketing device more than, you know, just being one of the teams on this in the group?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that was when it was first announced, it did feel exactly as you described. I'm like, well, are they going to be getting competitive games here? You know, and I would hope for the NBA moving forward, they did learn from the bubble experience that having them essentially as one of the G League teams is far more valuable than the route that you explained.
And also much more interesting. I'm not like someone who, like, you know, every now and again, like I remember when Dylan Windler had a couple games with the Charge last year, I watched it to get a sense, but I'm not like a G League consumer right now. You know, I think a lot of NBA Twitter people might say they are, but they're not really. You know, I'm not a G League consumer, and I wanted to go watch those games, you know, and because I knew it was in a truly competitive environment as opposed to kind of a, you know, again, like a road show where it's like we're trying to drum up interest in these target demographic markets for the NBA. So, you know, even though like I think the original plan was to be a bit more marketing focused, I think this application was actually better to draw eyeballs than the original Constitution.
No doubt about that. And I mean, I think we saw these guys actually improve too, especially Jalen Green.
Yeah, Green kind of came in a little icy, right? Like it felt like Kuminga was taking all the pub, and now Green is like the number one, you know, definitely above Kuminga on every board.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that dude can score. He can get buckets.
Yeah, he's exciting to me. Like to me, what Green brings to the table is very similar to what the Cavs had in Kevin Porter Jr. And like if that's ultimately where they end up in this draft lottery, that would be something that would excite the hell out of me. I would encourage all of our listeners, if you're not already checking out the big board that the Ringer puts out, I absolutely love it. I love having the option to change it up and go from skimming to peruse, the deep dives and all that. Now, it hasn't been updated in about a month from what I'm seeing right now. How would you define the top two tiers for this draft? But before we get into what happens if the Cavs fall in kind of that tier 3, which guys would
let us dream big for a minute?
Yeah. Let's go optimistic first.
Hey, I mean, with the lottery odds, you don't need to have, you know, the third or fourth best odds that have any chance of getting number one. You can have the seventh, eighth best odds. But I mean, I think that clear tier 1 for me is just simply Cade Cunningham and Evan Mobley. It's those two. And I view those two guys as the crown jewels in this draft class, the people who can be immediate difference makers on the team and also franchise changers long-term. And I look at either of those players and they would be just magnificent fits with the roster. Mobley can play next to Jarrett Allen in the front court or as the lone big on the floor. He is a low maintenance player who doesn't care about having the ball in his hands all the time or needed in his hands all the time. He can spot up for you, can attack closeouts with size. Like Evan Mobley would be probably be the ideal. Cade Cunningham might be the number one prospect, like on a general board. But then you do have some friction there with having maybe too many guys that need the ball in their hands. And that raises questions about, well, what do you do with Sexton? What do you do with Garland if you're bringing in Cade Cunningham? But ultimately, like if you do have the choice at number one, I don't think any team should make the same mistake that the Sacramento Kings did and passing on Luka because they had De'Aaron Fox. Like De'Aaron Fox is a very nice player. He is not Luka. Yeah. And Cade Cunningham is not Luka, but he is a high level prospect. And ultimately, like I'd have Cade still number one on my personal Cavs big board. But Evan Mobley's the easier fit. Yeah, those two guys are my top tier.
Before we start talking about how they fit, because you actually kind of caught me off guard with the Cade thing, because I look at Cade and I go perfect fit for this roster. But before we get into that, I do want to just ask, because I'm neither of us are NCAA watchers in any significant way. Most of our draft knowledge comes from, you know, talking to people like you. When you talk about a tier 1, like tier 1 can mean a lot of different things in a lot of different drafts. How do you think this tier 1 compares to, you know, other drafts tier 1s? Like, do we think these are surefire superstars? Like, you know, maybe not at the Zion or Luka level prospect, but like kind of like where would you compare them to other tier 1s?
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of people do talk about Cade and Evan Mobley as no-brainer superstars. I wouldn't say they're that quite that level where it's obvious, that they will be. There's still a chance Cade Cunningham, creating off the dribble. That's one of the people look at his speed. He can create shots at the college level. They say, well, what about the NBA? Can he do that against elite level defenders? Solve some of the issues with doing that in the tournament. But ultimately, I'd have him a tick below that no-brainer status because he doesn't have that elite athleticism on his side. But the IQ, the shot creation ability, especially projecting long-term, the defensive ability, I see him as close to clear as like a top 25 guy in the league. And when I say top 25, you want to hear top 10, but it's so hard to break through into the top 10 in today's NBA. I mean,
the league's absurd. Honestly, there's probably like 30 top 10 players, and where they stack up in that comes down to what's their organizational fit. How were they developed? Are they being maximized? Like, that's what it really comes down to. Like, there's the LeBron, Steph, KD kind of tier where, they're clearly, let's call them top 5 guys instead of top 10, but everyone else, like, it just blows me away just how talented the league is right now.
And that's the thing. It's like almost, it's hard to talk about because like the no-brainer star, you would say, oh yeah, there's a clear path to him being in that top 5 or that top 10. With Cade, like, what if he ends up being the 12th best player in the NBA? Is that such a bad thing? No, it's not. That'd be awesome. That means you're getting like Paul George or Jason Tatum level production. Not saying that style of play, but that level of status if you're ranking them all up and down. So, I think with Evan Mobley, it's the same thing too. You're going to get a guy who is a potentially elite level defensive player. And offensively, it's like I said earlier, you're going to get somebody who can do some stuff for you. He's a smart player. He can attack off the dribble a little bit. It's just a matter of what level he reaches as a shooter off the dribble, what level he reaches in terms of his ability to create offense off the dribble. But the rawness that you see at this age is, incredible. It's incredible. So not clear cut elite top 5, 10, but I feel pretty good about both of those guys being top 25, top 30 players. And that's not, you can't say that in many draft classes. So in that sense, this year's top is better than last year's. And it's not quite some of the other strong drafts we've seen. But it's still really, really good.
So now I kind of, if it's okay, I'd like to actually discuss that Cade fit thing, because to me, I look at the Cavs and they have the 30th offense in the league for a reason. And I think that reason is they lack high-level basketball IQ across the board. Like I don't think their decision-making as a team is particularly strong. Like, you can quibble with some of the jump shooting. You can obviously quibble with health. I don't think they'd have the 30th offense in the league if Kevin Love plays all season. But you look at players who can read a defense at a really, really high level, and really it's only Darius right now. He's the only one who's able to manipulate a defense that's set and kind of generate something from nothing. Like, Colin can generate that for himself. But like, I think what we found this season when Colin is truly moved off ball, as opposed to last year where he was still pretty much playing point guard, just Darius also is eating some possessions too. But when we see him truly off ball, like, he's bananas guarding, attacking an offset defense, a defense that's already been destabilized. So like, I look at someone like Cade and I think, this is an extra playmaker that is actually playmaking. And I don't see, like, I just feel like there's no downside there. And what I really like about it is Cavs fans love to have the breakup Sexland argument. They love it. It's their favorite argument that I'm completely disinterested in. But what I kind of see here is if you draft someone like Cade, it doesn't actually matter much, because you can ride Sexland to its logical conclusion. And if you run into it, okay, you just slide in Okoro at the 2, or Cade at the 2, whatever you want to, whoever you want to assign to each position, and you're still rolling. You've made no fundamental sacrifices to your core. Curious what you think about that take now that I've kind of laid it out.
No, I mean, I agree with you. And ultimately, like, if we're speaking about fit, when I say not a perfect fit, it's really a matter of, well, that pushes Colin Sexton into that third, creator role, sure, where then there's the question of, well, are you going to accept and embrace being like this critical spark plug? JB walks into the locker room and says, hey, Colin, we need you to be our Manu coming off the bench. Like, do you accept that? You know what I mean? Like, those are the conversations that would have to be had at some point. if you're bringing in a Cade Cunningham. And I mean, that's a good problem to have. That'd be a good problem to have if it comes to that point.
That's my favorite problem. If the team has gotten so good around Colin that Colin has to go there someday, then fine, we'll have that discussion, But that's why I'm not in any hurry to actually have the argument, because I'm like, we'll get there when we need to.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes total sense to me. And ultimately, people talk about drafting for need versus drafting for, best player available, though this would be both. Yeah. He's the best player available, and also he does fill the need with the shot creation ability next to Garland in that sense. And maybe that could work out for the best long term. Maybe Sexton does embrace that, because let's not forget, I mean, I'm curious, where do you guys think Sexton is defensively right now?
Yeah, it's improved, I think, this year, especially on ball. He still kind of dies on some screens, and the attention will go away. He has a little bit of what we saw with Devin Booker. I feel like when it's a close game, you'll step up and make some big plays defensively, but when it's kind of in that 15-20 point margin, you can see kind of the effort's not consistently there. I like his wingspan, and I think that there is the potential for a defender there, but it hasn't been as much of a leap as I would have liked to see on that end. The interesting thing for me, and mentioning kind of what role Sexton may have depending on who they draft and where kind of the development goes, is the most important thing for me is that Garland and Sexton learn how to play together, because even if Sexton is in the bench role, unless you're saying he shouldn't be a 30-minute per game player, these guys are going to have to play a significant number of minutes together. And right now you're seeing Sexton be that first sub out, and then he's playing with the bench now. And I don't think, depending on who starts, that dynamic would change a whole lot. But I just love the idea of adding talent that does kind of fit together. And when it comes to those starting 5 spots, you're going to have the opportunity for guys to go out and earn it. And to me, he gets that spot until someone comes up and takes it from him.
Ultimately, I do think it's interesting with Sexton, because what we're finding is that when he is playing that, solo, I'm the only ball handler on the floor, it's actually not really what's best for him. No. When we see him playing next to Darius, or even early stretch Delly when he returned, just like an actual point guard who can get the team into the offense, when he's able to operate as a cutter, as someone who can leak out in transition, everything just gets easier for him. And the offense he starts being that play finisher for them. And I feel like that's one of the reasons I'm so enamored with a big creating wing, because I'm an NBA fan and that's what everyone wants. But that's the reason that's within this construct. I'm so enamored, because it's it just can allow Colin to be a perma play finisher. No matter what the construct is, you either have Darius out there or you have Cade out there, and Colin can just be Colin. As opposed to every time they try to just make him a point guard, it doesn't feel it's round peg square hole, or is it the inverse? Whatever the expression is, that's what it is.
It's not ideal.
No, I mean, that's why I asked about his defense, because I think you look back at his history in college and high school, this dude plays so hard, and he's had some lockdown moments on the defensive end of the floor. I'm very curious about what Colin Sexton becomes when it's well, we don't need you scoring 24, 25 points per game. We need 16 points from you, and we need you to be an elite defender every single night, defending opposing guards and defending even up a position sometimes against some bigger guys just playing bigger than you are. And not that he would need to if you have Okoro and Cunningham on the team as well, when you have that. So, but with Sexton, I feel like there's that ability if he finds himself in that situation. It's sort of like we touched on earlier. The top players in the league, however you have them ranked 12th or 25th, some of it is about situation, and some of it is about role and responsibility that gets the best out of the players. And with Colin Sexton, he's gotten better. And he has gotten better each year with Cleveland, doing the things that maybe he won't need to do quite as much when the team is actually in the playoffs, has hopes of contending and all that. So in that sense, Cade would be the guy. He's the number one dream. But the good thing for Cleveland is there are other players to, fantasize about and get excited about.
Yeah, I really like a lot of this draft. Like it seems like even the guards for the most part, like I think Suggs is probably the one that kind of creates an awkward fit and something that they would need to work through. But outside of that, like a lot of the guards are like 6'5", 6'6". Like you can see them playing on the wing. When you look at that second tier, the consensus that I've seen this year is kind of Suggs, Green, and Kuminga. Do you still have those three, or is there anyone else that you would include in that second tier?
It's funny. I mean, it's very possible tier 2 for me is just Green and Suggs.
I see things trending that way. Yeah.
I mean, with Kuminga, he's the one that I'm a little iffy on. Like, I want to go back and rewatch all his stuff again just to get a better vibe for him. And also like the intel aspect, there's still more to learn about who these players are as people too, so that's an important component of it as well, and really diving deep and figuring out what tier these guys go in or just what their ranking is. But yeah, generally right now those guys, I still have them as my top 5. I have Jalen Green 3rd, Suggs 4th, and then Kuminga 5th. So that would be my second tier to wrap up the top 5 at the moment.
If the Cavs were to land at 3, do you just take Green and not worry about Suggs if you're the Cavs, just because it's a little bit easier?
I mean, first thing I'm doing is I'm thinking about what trades are available.
Really?
I mean, because you mentioned, I mean, I'm always thinking about trades, like what opportunities there could be. Because with Jalen Green, he's 6'5", listed at 6'5", and super, super light. Like, he's so lean. I would worry about you mentioned he could bring some of the stuff Kevin Porter Jr. could have with the scoring ability and all that, be a go-to scoring presence. But I do wonder, is it a little bit redundant with what you already have? And would you be better served finding, a guy at 7 or 8 and getting additional assets with that too? So it depends on what opportunities would be available, but I would have Jalen Green 3rd if you must make a pick there.
That's really interesting. So you're talking about a potential trade down scenario, not necessarily like a consolidating talent to get someone that's proven type move. Correct?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've seen more trades in the top 5 in the last handful of years than we ever have. Like going back to the Tatum and Fultz one, or, Luka and Trey, it doesn't always work out, but I think for the most part, teams have been a little bit more willing to make those trades on draft night or even days before draft night. So if it does come down to it, and, we'll see what happens on lottery night. If the Cavs are in the lottery, still potential with the play-in tournament. We'll see.
Take a look at that May schedule. It's not a lot of fun. I think it's pretty safe. Now, you did get me really intrigued here, because you mentioning it like a potential trade down or evaluating that as an option makes me think you don't feel like there's a massive drop off into that 3rd tier. So how big of drop off is there, and how deep into the draft would you say that 3rd tier extends?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a drop off. I mean, Jalen Green, you can see a world in which he's like the best player on your team. You can see that. So, I mean, it might be silly of me to even suggest that. But ultimately, it's all about how teams evaluate these individual players. Like, I think you can look at somebody like Keon Johnson from Tennessee, who I have ranked 6th, as a guy who has a lot of potential long-term appeal with his raw offensive skill. He could be a go-to scorer for you long-term. So let's just say Cleveland or whatever team is drafting 3rd is like, we like this guy pretty much just as much as Jalen Green, and he's a better fit or whatever. I definitely see the value in trading down. Not saying he would be the guy, for Cleveland. I'm just, bringing that up as a theoretical, or Kai Jones out of Texas for that matter, a raw big man. Maybe there's more value in bringing him in for some teams. So I think there's always value in trading down, especially if teams are willing to overpay to move up. And if there's a team that like highly covets the guy that they would want to take 3rd, you could end up with a couple of 1st round draft picks that could be ammo for who knows, maybe the player you keep a year from now, or you potentially use in a trade. I just think it's always good to have draft equity. Granted, if you're talking about trading for stars right now, it's kind of hard to get into that Oklahoma City, New Orleans class. Like they just have, right now Oklahoma City has 34 picks in the next 7 years, 17 first rounders. Like nobody, like if OKC wants to get a star player in a trade, they can get that star player. So, it's hard to get into that class, but for, moves around the edges, I love having that ammo.
Yeah, it's good to be able to give a team like the Wizards, if they move Beal, like 15, 28th overall picks.
I sense some snark there, Carter.
Just a little bit of snark.
Just a little bit.
I just all I'm saying is, and I've said this multiple times on the pod, is like, if Presti doesn't like make a bunch of small little moves where he's conglomerating that, then he's messing up. Like if he thinks a 10 pick swap is going to make sense, I just I just think like to some extent like that starts burning a hole in your pocket. Like we've seen it with Boston. Like if you have a chance to package a couple to move up like 10 picks to go get someone you really love, or like 5 picks to get, like, just do it. Like I actually that's part of the reason I loved the Jared Allen trade so much, because I'm like, Cavs have this 2022 Milwaukee pick, probably going to be 28th or 30th. They've got a lot of kids on the roster already. Like just consolidate your assets. So I hope to see Presti do that in the non-snark department. I do want to ask though, Kevin, if this team, if things go terribly for the Cavs and they fall into that 8, 9, 10 range, we've got some fanboys in our Discord of Scotty Barnes, of Moses Moody. Who do you think kind of makes sense for the Cavs there? And like, this is maybe a silly question, but how bummed should Cavs fans be if they fall into that 9-10 range?
I mean, I think you should always be bummed if on lottery night you're not getting at the top 4 pick or number 1 or number 2. That's always a bummer. But it's the type of thing where sometimes you just don't know. Like sometimes you just don't know what level a guy is going to reach. Like when you asked that, I just thought about Donovan Mitchell going to Utah, right after losing Gordon Hayward. And it's like, I loved Mitchell as a prospect. I think I had him ranked 9th or 10th. Like, I mean, I get plenty of misses, but like, I'm happy with my evaluation of Mitchell. And yet I never saw him turning into the guy that he has with the Jazz. Like, he's so much better than I could have imagined. And so sometimes you just don't know. So like with Scotty Barnes, you mentioned there's like fanboys of him in your Discord. So it's like with Barnes, there's no doubt that this dude is going to be a really nice defensive player. He can play make a bit for you at 6'9". You could use him like in a Bam style role, right? Facilitating from the elbow wing area for you. Like, you can see that path. And you worry about the shooting today. You worry about the scoring in the half court in a lot of different situations, but like, you don't know sometimes how a guy is going to develop. So I think when it comes to like, if Cleveland does fall into that like 8 to 12 range or whatever it might be, disappointment is fair and it is definitely justified, but that doesn't mean there's not quality talent available with a heck of a lot of talent, long term. So I think there's a number of those guys, whether it's Scotty Barnes or Moody, Johnson, there's a handful that could exceed expectations depending on where they land.
How would you compare the talent of that group to, let's say, even just this past draft where you have like Isaac Okoro going 5? Do you feel like they're kind of in a similar tier of prospect?
I think so. Yeah. Pretty close in terms of there's some safe bets. Like, I feel good about this guy being a role player. I feel good about this guy being in the NBA for 8+ years, 10+ years, but not a lot of guys where it's like, okay, this guy has a clear path to stardom. So in that sense, I'd say it's comparable.
Yeah, I feel like there's more talent coming into the league each year than ever before. And if you're not at that kind of top 3, 4, it usually just comes down to how good is your player development? What type of buy-in are you getting from that player? And you can get guys that become players that matter. Like, you look around the league, like Denver, Utah, all these teams, Toronto, Miami, like, their core guys aren't guys that were picked in the top 5. Like, it comes down to just kind of that organizational strength and player development. Who among the group that's currently not in the top 5 do you feel has the best chance of having like a Patrick Williams type jump up into that group?
Is it fair to say Davion Mitchell, or has that jump already happened?
That's a great question. Out of the ones the Cavs might consider drafting, because I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I don't think they're going to draft a 6'1" point guard.
Yeah, exactly. So like Davion Mitchell sort of off the table for Cleveland. I'm super into Scotty Barnes. I know we just hit on him a little bit earlier, but I love that dude. I love his personality. He works hard. I think he has the basketball IQ. It's just, some of the skills are so raw that he's so far away from making that offensive impact. And yet I do sort of get into the idea of him with Cleveland having those guards revolving around him. We talked earlier about the idea of pushing Sexton off ball a little bit. Well, you could do that with Scotty Barnes in the right offensive role. And I know, like, if we're talking like fit issues with Jarrett Allen, there might be some spacing issues. It's a different conversation for another day, but I am into the fit, and I am into what Scotty Barnes can be. And one other guy, Kai Jones out of Texas, again, probably not the best fit for Cleveland, which is touching on like maybe a greater issue here is like, is there that guy in the late lottery that is that no-brainer, fit for upside? There's fits for.
I mean, Moody feels like a fit for what they need. They need some size and shooting.
Kispert even too. Granted, he struggled, in the tournament a bit, but like the shooting ability, totally out on him.
We're out on old dudes on this podcast.
Well, no, like if you're going to go, like I'd almost rather go with like Franz Wagner than Kispert. Like to me, Kispert, it just kind of freaks me out just a little bit, kind of seeing how he responded to like the speed in the championship game and stuff like that. Like I just feel like there's better options for kind of what the Cavs need is. And Carter mentioned him, and our Discord did request a breakdown of Moses Moody, because he is the guy that I'm starting to trend towards, like really kind of coveting. If you do fall into like that 8 spot, I could see, if Barnes is off the table, I could see Moody being a guy that just is a really seamless fit with what they already have.
For sure, no doubt. And, with Moody, the year he showed the ability to play on and off the ball. And I think when you're building this thing out, regardless of if you're Cleveland or any other team, it's great to have multiple guys who can be unselfish and play with or without the ball. That's just the way the game is trending in some situations. Some situations you have the one lone ball dominant player like a Luka or a Trey. Other teams, it's a bunch of sharing and having as many guys on the court as possible that can attack. It seems to be one or the other. And if it does lean that route, with having as many guys as possible who can create, Moses Moody would be perfect. 6'8" with his size, multi-positional ability on defense to defend smaller guys, some bigger guys. He's smart. He can make some flashes off the dribble for you long term. I think to me that makes a heck of a lot of sense with what Cleveland has right now, especially because he brings the youth factor. With Kispert, you're drafting an older player, and Kispert feels like a pick to me for a team that's ready to win today. It's like, we're going to bring somebody in right now who can help. For Cleveland, it's about, well, let's find a guy who can help, on the same timeline as these other guys. And with Moody, he's already a smart player, so it's not like you're bringing him in and he's going to need a heck of a lot of coaching in that sense. So Moody makes total sense to me too. I like it. I'm glad Cavs fans are into him.
Well, yeah, it's one of those things. At least one Cavs fan. I just think it's one of those things too, like where outside of LeBron, it has just been so long since the Cavs have had a big wing they can really count on, like with legitimate, 6'7", 6'8" size. Like, I love Okoro, but he's 6'5", and like there are so many players in the NBA at the elite level where you're just like, yeah, he's gonna be just a little shorter than you want, guarding them out on the perimeter. Having another person with size with some defensive instincts, it is pretty enticing, I gotta say.
Yeah, and with him, it's the type of thing where I was gonna say, you said you guys haven't had like a 6'8" creator, D-Wade, baby. Just kidding. But yeah, with Moody, it's the type of thing where that's what he needs to develop, is that on-ball creation. Like, he had some issues doing that this past season, but he's still so young, and some of the flashes are appealing. And at the least, you're getting somebody who is a very good defensive player who has shown the ability to excel off the ball. And over the course of time, maybe he does develop more of that. But I think if you're drafting mid-lottery, late lottery, you like to have a guy that gives you a baseline, a foundation for success. Somebody who can have a successful career, but also build up from that. And I think that was the appeal with Okoro, where he has the defense, he has the IQ. Well, what level could his shot reach? With Darius Garland, he has the playmaking ability. Well, what level does his, ability to score for himself reach? Having that baseline is important, and Moody does seem to have it.
Yeah, what I really want is just like a forward that can compete for that starting small forward spot, and then from there, like have that versatility to maybe play at the power forward and kind of play like that Jason Tatum type role where you can potentially have those 4 perimeter players that the Cavs have playing at one time, or kind of stack it with whatever dynamic ends up working out best. The other thing, I've just talked myself into the Cavs player development when it comes to shooting, because like you mentioned it before, like Colin Sexton coming in, he was supposed to be a defensive guy that couldn't really shoot, and he's turned into a shooter. and they've developed the jump shots of Larry Nance Jr., Jetty Osman, although that's kind of fallen off a little bit this year. So it makes me feel a little bit better when a guy doesn't necessarily have bad mechanics, but just hasn't had a consistent shot, that they can help elevate that aspect of their game. The one more guy that I really want to touch on is Jalen Johnson, because he was higher on boards to start this year, and him falling, do you think it has to do more with him pulling out of Duke, or was there just things that came up throughout the season when he was playing that kind of made scouts cool on him a little bit?
A little bit of both. Leaving Duke, it's not the first time, having some character concerns with him. He left IMG Academy during his senior year too. So, teams do have questions about that. And that touches on like what we said earlier about learning more about who these prospects are as people and what motivates them and what matters to them is a critical component of projecting forward. And with Johnson, that'll be one of the questions people have in the league. So, but with him, it's also just the fact that he's like not a shooter. He's a poor shooter. And I know he shot a high percentage, but it was on like 15, 20 3-point attempts. So with him,
18 total per the Ringer draft guide, which everyone should check out.
Yeah. So with him, it's the type of thing where character issues, shooting is the most important skill in the NBA right now. And if you don't have that, those are 2 checks against you. So there's still an undeniable amount of talent there. I mean, anytime you're 6'9", 6'10" with playmaking ability, there's appeal. There's appeal for him to be a versatile defender as well. So he's going to remain a lottery prospect in my book, unless there's any other reason to move him down. But at this point, I can't move him up too high with those concerns.
Kevin, one more question before we let you go. Taking it back to our dear Cleveland Cavaliers. Are the Cavaliers a playoff team next season in your eyes?
I'd lean towards no.
Okay.
But I don't think that's a bad thing. I really don't. I think the league is so talented right now, and there's so many teams that have championship aspirations. That if you're like a 7-8, then when I say not a playoff team, let me clarify. I mean like top 6, because like 7-8, you're still not necessarily in the playoffs.
Sure, you're in the play-in.
Yeah, I think Cleveland could safely be a play-in team next year. But if you're not a top 6, it's so early for that right now. I'm not even sure you want to be that right now. So for Cleveland, it's really almost more about just what fans see watching games, what you guys see watching games, the development night in, night out, month to month. That's what matters more so than the win-loss column.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because I will say, like, as much as Cavs fans, I think we're starting to hit the first tinges of impatience, where it's like, okay, this is year 3 post LeBron. We get it this year, but next year I think people are going to be really ready. And like the reality is, and I keep joking that the best thing that this team can do is get older, which is the least interesting, bit of analysis. Yeah. But like next year, they've got a team of 22-year-olds. Next team, they're gonna have a team of 23-year-olds. So it's like that's still a pretty hard road. When you're that young, it's just a really hard road to contendership. So I'm not surprised by the answer. I do think that with some better luck, that might change. I don't know, Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think like part of why I've advocated for them getting this experience down the stretch is because I think they're going to be in this situation next year. Like they're going to be fighting for a play-in spot. They might be in the position that Chicago is in right now, and getting that experience against teams that really want to win. This is the closest thing to playoff experience you can get for these guys. And I think Cade would make a huge difference if they get that lottery luck. But for the most part, like these guys are going to take time. It's going to be a process. And if they are going to be a good team, it's probably going to have to do more with the internal development that these guys that are currently on the roster have than adding another 19-year-old to the mix.
Yeah.
Yeah, how about that? Well, on that note, Kevin, I got to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really, really appreciate your time. As Carter and I have both plugged, make sure you're checking out the Ringer Draft Guide. Is there anything else that you'd like to let our audience know about before we wrap this thing up?
No, I mean, I appreciate you guys having me on. This is super fun. It's awesome to see you guys having a home with the Cavaliers. It's dope. I love it. Happy 2-month anniversary, right?
Thank you so much.
Thanks for the Caps.
Yeah, no kidding.
We haven't been fired after 2 months. That's huge.
Thank you so much for keeping us around. That's the main thing. Well, Kevin, thank you so much, and a big thanks to our listeners as well. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe to help us show up in those algorithms. If you're listening on the podcast, make sure you leave a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of the Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, you can send a screenshot of that review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there, and until next time, go Cavs.